Welcome to the Bearded Bereans, where we analyze topics of the day in the light of the scriptures.
Welcome to another episode of the Bearded Bereans. I'm joined by Jason Bolt. My name's Cole Strawn, and looking forward to getting back into the saddle. It's been quite a while since we've been able to come together and meet and discuss whatever topics might need to be discussed in the line of scriptures. Before we get into our topic today, how long has it been, Jay, since you've had a cigar? Has it been as long as me?
Possibly, yeah. Well, I doubt it. I don't know. It's probably been numerous weeks for you.
Yeah, it's been numerous weeks. I was under the weather for quite a while, and it's just not a good thing to mix tobacco and bronchitis.
No, it's just not enjoyable, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's good. But you're feeling better?
Much better as far as that goes, yeah.
Good.
So,
Good. So what do you have with you?
So I've got I think it's Casa Fuente. If I'm being honest, I can hardly read it. I will put it close to the camera for people that might watch this.
Okay.
So the story on this, I got this for a thank you gift for teaching at my church's, I don't know if you want to call it a school. It's more like a co-op maybe. Taught literature this last year, and this was my thank you gift. From what I understand, there's only two places that you can get this cigar. One is in some hotel in Vegas, and the other place is at the small local cigar shop that's here in town. Yeah, I don't know how it has those connections. That's what the gifter, and I have no reason to doubt her, as she is she's quite astute when it comes to whether someone's blow smoke up her rear. So
that doesn't sound very pleasant, does it?
no, it doesn't. It doesn't. I don't even know where that came from. Like, how did that become a euphemism for lying? Anyway, so what do you have?
Well, so I've been looking forward to this episode because we haven't been in the studio for a while. So I've been looking forward to this for some time. I don't know if our listeners will recall, but some number of months ago, you gave everyone a little tip that if you ever find yourself at a little boutique cigar shop, ask the guy, hey, what little, niche cigars do you have? So I find myself in this great little cigar shop. Goodness, what's the name of it? It's not written down here, is it? It's Corona Cigar Company, I think is what it's called. They've got numerous shops around the country, but we were in Florida, just outside of Orlando, for a joyous occasion for a wedding about a month or so ago.
Yes.
And so I find myself in this little shop, and I'm thinking of Cole the whole time I'm there. So I go and ask the guy. I go and ask the guy behind the counter, hey, I want to pick up something local. What do you suggest? Then he starts rattling off all this stuff that I don't understand, And I was like, well, come here, just show me what you like, So he walked me over and he pointed to a few things, but he kept pointing back at this one. It's a 20-acre farm, Connecticut wrapper, but it's grown on this 20-acre farm. And they have this little boutique brand or whatever you want to call it that comes from there. So anyways, I'm looking forward to it. It should be good.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Have to let us know how it goes, and maybe we can tag them on the social medias and help them out. Maybe they can help us out on dispersal. So no, that's great. I'm glad you were thinking about me during that time. It has really been a long time. I really wish we could have gone to that wedding. Good friends of ours.
It was really nice. I don't really like weddings. I know that sounds bad, but partially I don't like crowds and groups of people, and weddings, there's always crowds and groups of people, so that's part of it. But seems to be a lot of, I don't know, this is a generalization. Okay, I'm not
Mhm.
picking on anyone in particular, but there's a lot of like extra biblical stuff that I see and hear at weddings, and sometimes it just kind of irritates me. And then you throw in that there's 100 people there or whatever it is, and I just typically don't enjoy them.
Yeah.
But this one was very nice. I mean, not only did we know the people getting married and happy for them, but the wedding just objectively was very tasteful. It was about 15 minutes long, which is just about right. Friends were there to celebrate with them, so it was quite nice.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
Well, I think that's I would love to at some point talk about the marriage covenant with you, and know that we want to have that slated for a upcoming season. So that's
yep,
in
that's on the
the.
horizon. Yep.
But tonight we are going to talk about something a little different because we have July 4th coming up, Independence Day, America. Let's so what are we going to talk about as it relates to America?
Yeah, right. We're coming up to the fourth right now. When this airs, I'm sure it'll be after the fourth, but we're still in that time of year. There's been fireworks going off all week long, and my dog's about to have a heart attack every night, and I'm sure that will continue for the next week or so. So it's a whole season. Um, so we can talk about it now and keep talking about it later. But there's a number of things that have come up in the news that I think are related to this. There's the debate was somewhat recent, and there's been a number of Supreme Court cases that have where decisions have been released recently. Um, of course, Trump's ongoing trials and all of that, and a lot of these things are related, and some of them they're sort of related to July 4th and independence and what it means for us to be a nation and the things that we were founded on, the principles that we were founded on, and that have kept us who we are for a couple of centuries. And so, one of the things that has come up in the news recently that I think deserves a little bit of analyzation, if that's a word. Is that a word? Analysis,
Analyzing,
probably.
and yeah, probably analysis. Yeah,
Okay. This
I want
is
to do
how
my I
stupid
want to do
people
my
make
Tucker.
themselves feel smart, right?
Hold on, Jay. I got to do my Tucker laugh. Excuse me.
that's, that's pretty good.
Hmm.
That's pretty good. He does laugh a lot.
I
To
love
get
it.
through those interviews,
You have to.
you have to laugh. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's just sad and depressing.
Yeah.
Um, no,
Yeah.
but one of the things that has come up that deserves to be analyzed in the light of the scriptures is this concept of censorship. And there's a Supreme Court case that came out recently that dealt with the issue of censorship and the government's involvement with social media, and is trying to control the information that is communicated on social media. Um, and I think that deserves some discussion. Exactly what is the government's role in relation to, say, media, um, and what do the scriptures have to tell us uh, about that? I think it's probably something that we don't really think about a whole lot. We've got the Fourth Amendment and the First Amendment, and we kind of cling to those things. But should we cling to those things? Should they be stronger than they're actually worded? Should they be weaker? So, censorship, that's the topic of the day.
Yeah. So let's analyze it in light of scripture. I think one thing, I mean, you mentioned that it's not something that we think about a lot. Obviously, it's in the headlines, but we don't, as Christians, tend to, and we talk about this a lot, we don't tend to think, how does scripture speak to this thing? Because it's a quote unquote modern problem, right?
Right?
We tend to think, well, that's more a modern issue. Does the Bible really speak to that? Are the principles really applicable to something like that? So I think, yeah, this could be an effective, helpful exercise, maybe to get people to think about it. What you mentioned the way information flows. How do we frame this as a biblical argument? What are we, or a biblical principle that speaks to the flow of information? How does that work?
I think there's a couple of biblical principles that apply. Um, Obviously, there's a lot, particularly in the New Testament, about gossip and slander, and that has to do with information being shared. So I think those principles would apply, though we're dealing with more than gossip and slander when we're looking at social media or media in general. But certainly there is gossip and slander. Um, and
Can we
so,
take those one by one and
sure,
define what those are biblically, gossip and slander?
sure. They're often tied together in Paul's epistles. They're sort of talked about like a cancer in the church that, um, it's one of those sins that's just so easy to fall into, and it's really difficult to root out. And it's also like addictive. Like most workplaces, you go into any workplace and you're going to hear gossip and slander. Um, it's I don't know what it is about the human condition that lends us to that. But
Could be
they're
our
they,
sinful proclivity.
uh, yes, but why is it that we're so drawn to that and we're not all drawn to heroin? You know,
True.
um, there's something about gossip and slander that just makes us feel really good for a moment.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, we'll define them. Okay, so gossip typically is understood as true information that the person you're sharing it with doesn't have the right to access.
Mm.
Okay, so for instance, or sometimes it would be true information but private information and being shared with someone outside of that private circle. Therefore, they don't have the right to that information, and it's typically done with with a with the motivation of wanting to make the person look not good, right? It reflects poorly on the person's character that you're talking about, and it's usually done with almost a comparison of, see, this person's terrible and I'm actually better than that person,
Mhm.
kind of thing. So, for example, my neighbor comes home at 2 o'clock in the morning, because I'm up with my dog because he's freaking out because of the fireworks, and I see him, pulling in the driveway, and he kind of stumbles out of the car, and beer cans fall out, and he goes over and takes a leak on the fence, and kind of stumbles inside. And so the next morning, I see my other neighbor, and I'm like, "Oh, did you see Billy last night? Yeah, he came home at 2 o'clock in the morning, drunk as could be. Oh yeah, it's true, but it's gossip. Like it's nobody's business. I don't need to tell my other neighbor about Billy. And this isn't true, by the way. But I didn't really. I was up last night at 2 in the morning, but my neighbor didn't come home drunk.
Mhm.
Just an illustration. Um, so, like that would be an example of gossip, right? Um, Sharing true information that is private, essentially.
Mhm.
Slander, on the other hand, is like the opposite. It's false information that's designed to harm a person's character. So if Billy across the street is running for city council and I really don't like him, then I start telling the neighbor, "Did you see him come home at 2 o'clock in the morning last night? Yeah, he was drunk. He was driving drunk again. Right? It didn't actually happen. I made it up. I'm slandering him. It's a false attack on his character."
Yeah, those are very common, obviously in the church, but in the culture at large. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
hear the accusations and uh, oh, I think I shared this with you. There's a recent Tucker Carlson press corps or press Australian press meeting,
Yeah,
and they
yeah,
were
I watched that.
levying questions. Yeah, and just the way that the question was posed was slanderous, right? It
Mm-hmm.
was, you believe this, and to Tucker's credit, he challenged the journalist, saying, "I need you to cite that because that's not what I believe." And you have to be, I mean, in that situation, confrontational about what's being said about you.
Yeah.
But how does this relate to censorship, freedom of speech, things like that? You say those principles apply to those
Yep.
things.
So it applies in two ways. We'll take gossip first and then slander. Um, so the principle behind the um, prohibition against gossip is what I call right to know. So if a person has the right to know something, it can be shared with that person. And if the person doesn't have the right to know, then it can't be shared, right? That's where the line, the gossip line is right to know. So if let me see if I can think of an example. So let's say I'm a restaurant manager, okay, and I have a staff of a wait staff, and the owner comes in for his monthly audit or whatever, and says, you know what, Billy, this waiter, I really don't like him. We're going to let him go, but I'm going to try and find his replacement first. So don't tell him yet. But as soon as I find a replacement, he's gone. Okay. Got another thumbs up there. That's great. Yeah, I don't know what that is. There's got to be a button somewhere that I can push to turn that off, but I don't even know where to look for that button. So anyways, Billy's going to get fired. He has the right to know that. Like, it's information that impacts him and his livelihood. It's right to know. If I were to tell him, that would be fine. He has the right to that information. And the owner of the place doesn't have the right to keep it from him, at least in my view. And so when it comes to public information, which the media is ostensibly disseminating, the public has the right to that information, and it can be shared with them. And if an entity, and in this case the government, seeks to prevent that information from being shared, it's violating that right to know policy. Public information is by definition public. The public has the right to it. Therefore, it ought not, according to biblical teaching, be censored.
So I have a question. What defines public information versus, let's say, classified information? I mean, obviously the government has that thought that it can classify certain things, but is there an objective standard that we can say, no, this is this is rightfully public information. Government, you're holding these things back, in a wrong manner. Help me with that. I don't understand how we can. It seems arbitrary.
That's a great question. So we'll deal with the classified thing second, because I think it's two different issues. Public information just generally versus private, and then public versus classified. Two separate things. So we'll deal with the public versus private first.
Yeah.
I think there is an objective standard, but it's sort of like a natural standard, right? If something happens in public, it's public information. If something happens in private, it's private information. And we all know the difference between public and private, right? There's things that we do in public that we don't do in private. There's things we do in private that we don't do in public. And so we all know what that is. We all know it when we see it. We all know a private situation when we're in one. We all know a public situation when we're in one. And so the things that happen in public are public. And I would add to that one more thing, which is that anything that is any action taken or decision made by a public officer, and I would say that includes church officers as well as officers in the state, that is by definition public information, because they're acting on behalf of the people they are representing.
So the question that I have whenever you say something like that is, what happens if an officer is sinning privately?
Okay, let me rephrase that and be more specific. Anything that a public officer does in the function of his office.
Now you're starting to sound like the Supreme Court.
Well, yeah, they're onto something there. I'm not sure that I agree with the decision or not. I haven't been able to read through that one just yet. Say when a pastor preaches, okay, he's acting as in part of his public office, and that information is public information. If he is, when he's acting in his office, it's by default public. Now, there are some exceptions, particularly in counseling situations where he's dealing with a private matter of someone else. That matter is private. Or some sort of private disciplinary thing. That matter is private. But in general, anything a public officer does as part of his office, that is public.
Right. Whether
Right.
church or state.
Right. Whether church or state. Yes. So you get these, closed door session meetings and, like, no.
Shouldn't be a thing.
So we, the last session that I served on, we invited the congregation to come to the session meetings. A few of them did every now and then, not very often. And if we had to go into a executive session for something to deal with a private matter, we would. But other than that, the meetings were public, and we recorded them, and then we posted those online for our congregation to listen to if they wanted to. I think that's probably rare. I don't know. I'm not sure.
I would assume that's rare. I think that's good practice, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. So that sort of leads to the next question of the classified stuff, right? The church often acts like it has classified information. Well, the session met and discussed whatever, but everything they said, nobody can know. It's classified. I'm going to start using that next time an elder or a pastor or someone refers to one of these. Was that classified information?
That's great. That's great. Yes.
Yes, it is. So I would say that there is a time in the life of a political body when, and now I'm talking specifically about the state. I'd have to think through the church question. But in the state, there is a time when information may not be made public, or let me put it this way, when information could rightfully be withheld from the public. And that would be during wartime. And if that information were to hinder the war effort or help the enemy in some way, I think the state could then rightly prevent that information from getting out. It could rightly classify the information. Now, there's a couple of caveats there, of course. It would have to be a just war. And the state that is classifying the information would have to be on the right side of that just war. It couldn't just go around, indiscriminately killing people and be like, well, it's classified. We can't tell you about it. But you think of just war tactics in general. You look at Old Testament history in the nation of Israel, and they engaged in deceptive. Certainly seems to be a place for that, but it's always in wartime. And in order to do it rightfully, you have to be on the right side of a just cause. You can't just classify everything because, well, it's a national security issue. So therefore, nobody can know. Everyone will die if this information gets out. We've taken it a little too far.
Yeah. That's clearly the case now, right? With all the things that have happened, not during wartime, but rather police actions being taken.
Right.
I don't know that we've had a just war this century. So just war theory needs to be revisited.
We've had a just war.
Yeah.
Period.
Maybe the American War for Independence.
Maybe. Yep.
I don't know that you could really say anything else with a clear conscience has been just. But that one seems.
The War of 1812, potentially. I've thought a lot about that one. I mean, we were invaded. We sort of provoked the English. Not sort of.
We did provoke the English. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, other than that, there's war.
Please cross that big body of water and attack us.
Other than that, there's not a single war, and of course, I'm excluding the Civil War because we could go around and around about whether there was a just side in that. And we kind of already have a little bit on this show. But other than that, I can't think of a single conflict in which we were minding our own business and someone came and attacked us.
Right. And that includes, let's just say, the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
There's been plenty of provocation by NATO, and
Yeah.
to say that it's just and that this, is something that we need to be involved in is quite hypocritical. Obviously, this is not about just war theory, so we need to move on probably, but yeah.
But point being, the state can classify stuff in the midst of a just war.
Right.
But then I would say once that just cause has been finished, I don't know what the right word is there.
It should be made public. Yeah. And the reason for that is to hold people accountable to the standard, right? We want to be able to hold decision makers, kings, presidents, whatever, to the standard that they're not only sworn to uphold to, but bound to uphold according to the scriptures. So,
yeah. So you've got gossip and slander, biblical principles that apply. It's right to know. Well, so that's actually just the gossip portion, right to know. The slander portion is you don't have the right to say things that aren't true.
Right.
So the media is not free to just disseminate falsehoods.
Right.
And the government is not free to just disseminate falsehoods. And you and I are not free to just disseminate falsehoods. So it would be an interesting question. Could the government intervene to prevent slander? It's an interesting question. Of course, I would argue the government never
prevents anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, slander and gossip, there are two sins for which there isn't a sanction listed, right? Like drunkenness or, some of these sins, there's no sanction that goes along with it. And so in that case, the government has no tools at its disposal to do anything about it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because the tools at its disposal now are tools of tyranny, not tools of authority. Biblically speaking, there are no tools to punish the wicked in that situation.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And then obviously you slander. And here's an interesting thing. I mean, we do tend to. There are sanctions against libel, which is basically written slander, right?
Right.
So obviously our culture sees it as a crime. Often we talk about the distinction between sins and crimes in the scriptures, what's punishable by the government, what's not. And so just to clarify and make sure I understand, what you're saying is there is no tool to punish the sin of slander. Well, let me ask you this. What about bearing false witness in court?
Sure. That's a slightly more specific issue. Yes, it is a subset of slander, but it's slander done in a specific case. And of course, there is a sanction for bearing false witness in a court proceeding, and that is that the false witness gets the punishment that the defendant would have gotten.
Right. And that is the tool. So until it rises to the level of legal action, there is no tool.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair.
But of course, in the church, there is a tool. When a brother slanders another brother, the church has one tool, one sanction for all sins. The discipline is the same. Matthew 18. And so, if it's public drunkenness or slander or adultery or whatever it is, it's the same process and ultimately the same sanction, excommunication.
Right. Yeah, I think that's very helpful. Those two principles speak to the flow of information. So basically what we're saying is, or what you're saying is, that the government does not have a right to even infringe upon those two things, right? To infringe on someone slandering others or gossiping about others, a news organization, media, social media, things of that nature.
Right. Yeah. The government has no tool to prevent gossip or slander, and it certainly does not have the right to
Why?
prevent public information to from becoming public, and certainly does not have the right to disseminate or promote the dissemination of lies and falsehoods.
Yeah, yeah. So what are you saying that the scriptures would be free speech absolutist, as is a common saying nowadays? Elon Musk popularized that idea of being a free speech absolutist.
No, I wouldn't. And there's a couple of exceptions. I think one, of course, is that it has to be true. Right? We just talked about that. You aren't free to just say whatever you want. Um, you can't just make stuff up. It has to be true. And number two, there is something about public safety, that sort of thing. The Supreme Court has weighed in on this. Screaming fire in a crowded room, that sort of thing. You can't engage in a behavior that has the probability of leading to the violation of someone's rights. Okay, so if I know my neighbor has a heart condition and I come up behind him, in the dark and scare him, I sneak into he's out in the park and I sneak up behind him and boo, do I have the right to say boo? Well, not in that case, because it's going to give him a heart attack. So there are those exceptions, I think. Can you hear the fireworks going off?
I sure can. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's right over your head, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So, but let me back up and clarify. But the government has no right to deal with obviously the crowded room and yelling fire. Yes, it has recourse, but
Yep.
as far as the other, falsehoods in the news or whatever, it has no right to curtail those things.
Right.
Falsehoods
Yeah.
on social media, so to speak.
Yep.
Okay.
It's outside the government's purview.
So, and just to continue this positively, that is why church discipline, brotherly, submission to the scriptures is so important. Is because the government only has so much authority, and obviously the church has so much authority. So whenever you are an unbeliever or a nominal Christian and you're not submitting to the church and its discipline, you are missing something in your life, and you're not going to live, obviously, the best life you can, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a good observation. Yeah, appreciate that.
Yep.
Yeah, there are benefits to being in the church. There are tangible benefits in this life to being in the church. Obviously, having your sins atoned for and those kinds of things. That's a benefit too.
Utmost benefit, yeah.
But even beyond that.
Of principal benefit.
Yes.
No, that's helpful. Go to church, y'all. Go to church, find a good church that's going to hold to the scriptures, exercise lawful authority, and hold people around you and yourself accountable to what the scriptures say. That's great.
Yep.
Okay. That's censorship in a nutshell. Let's distill that down to a statement on censorship. Can we do that?
Yeah, we can. So, should we talk maybe just a little bit about the Supreme Court decision?
Yeah, let's do that.
And what that actually was, and then we can analyze that and maybe come up with a statement.
Okay.
Did you read through the decision at all?
I read through a couple of headlines, and okay. Honestly, I didn't know we were going to talk about this, but otherwise I would have. But yeah.
So I just read snippets here and there. My understanding of it, of course, though, is you had these social media companies who the allegation, that's the word I'm looking for.
What was the other word? Allegement and what? Analyzation. Yeah. We're going to have to disseminate a Bearded Bereans dictionary by the time this season's over with. Good.
Allegement.
Can you analyze something for me real quick?
Yeah. So the claim was that the federal government was working through and with social media companies to censor information and to control what was being disseminated on social media and what wasn't.
Right.
And so the claim was a violation of the First Amendment, and maybe even sometimes the Fourth Amendment. I'm not sure. Um, and so the Supreme Court's decision um, was that the federal government did not violate the First Amendment because essentially it didn't pass a law requiring the social media companies to do what they were saying.
Right.
Right? They were in communication with social media companies. They were flagging stuff. They had a whole apparatus set up. Say with Twitter. A whole wing of that of what agency would this have been? The State Department? I don't even know. Um,
I know the FBI was involved in it as well.
okay, so we'll say a whole wing of the FBI. I can be wrong about that, but whatever it
Yeah.
is, people essentially assigned to Twitter from the federal government. So government agents working with Twitter, and they would be looking through Twitter accounts, and they would find something, and they would notify Twitter, "Hey, this thing is here. We think it's bad. You might want to think about getting rid of it, or you should get rid of it," or however it was worded.
Twitter and Facebook, they did that of their own volition,
Right.
not under compulsion.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that was the Supreme Court's decision that ultimately these social media companies were doing it. And the First Amendment doesn't tell them not to do it. It only
Right.
tells the government to not do it.
Right.
And so they're free to do that. And in a sense, like, I agree with part of the Supreme Court's decision in that, if I own Twitter and someone's doing something on it that I don't like, I should be able to turn their account off. It's my
Right.
Twitter. In my front yard, some random person can't just come and put up a sign saying whatever he wants.
Right.
It's my yard. If he did that, I could take it down. And if I owned Twitter, I could do the same thing. So we don't inherently have a right to communicate through whatever means we want, unless
Right.
we own those means, right? So it comes back to ownership again, and the doctrine of property. And if I own the property, Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is, whatever media outlet, I control it. Then it's mine, and I can decide what information I disseminate through my own property and what I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's totally legitimate. The
Right.
question, of course, is, well, there's two questions. Question number one is, were these social media companies really just doing this of their own free volition? Or is it like when the government comes and knocks on the door and says, "Hey, it might be a good idea if you do X, Y, and Z, or you might get audited by the IRS, or we might send the ATF in to execute you at 5 o'clock in the morning, or whatever." They've got lots of tools to coerce people into compliance without passing a law that says they have to comply.
Yeah.
So that's an outstanding question, at least in my mind. And then the second question that's raised, of course, is, like, let's just say the Supreme Court is right, and these social media companies are acting on their own free volition and all that. And if the government wasn't involved, they would have done the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just assume that that's true. What the government is doing in notifying Twitter, "Hey, this information is bad, get rid of it," they have no business doing that.
Right.
We've
Right.
talked over and over and over about what the government is actually authorized to do, and monitoring media and issuing warnings about media and information is not one of the things that the government is authorized to do. So they have no business being there in the first place.
Right. Right. Yeah. The agencies shouldn't exist to
Right.
begin with that would be doing these things. Yeah. In you have to you have to wonder what is "shall not be infringed" mean. Does that mean any activity aimed at infringing on that right or infringing the right?
Right.
Would that not be, obviously I'm not a Supreme Court justice, but
For that.
yeah, no. No, Maybe now, yeah. As far as the new appointees, my gosh, Sotomayor. I mean, really, what are we doing here? But yeah, Clarence Thomas and Alito, their their intellects
Yeah, those two are pretty
far
sharp.
above my own.
Yeah,
So,
even Amy Coney Barrett,
mm,
she's pretty sharp too. She's she's almost too smart for her own good. She gets herself into these strange legal arguments that I think only she understands. Um, anyway, it's really interesting to see her development as a justice.
that's why there shouldn't be any women justices. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have said that. Honey, if you're listening, I'm sorry.
Another episode sometime, I think.
That another episode. You know, they always have arguments that nobody understands with themselves. Anyway, yeah.
When
Should
you're
we
the
edit
only
this
one
out?
who.
Oh, that's funny. So, let's talk about what does the First Amendment protect? Just to make that statement.
Well,
Do you have it in front of you?
let's read it, shall we?
We shall.
I don't have it in front of me, but I have one of these free acting companies that I have access to called Google.
Well, yeah, that's awesome.
And I can just type stuff in, and then it tells me
Yeah.
what it wants me to know, or what the government wants me to know. I'm not
Exactly.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress
Okay.
of grievances. So the clause or the statement here that is pertinent: Congress shall make no law prohibiting. Nope. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and then, obviously we haven't read all the way through, but it does seem like, the government didn't make a law. So,
Right. They didn't.
there you go. But biblically speaking, and we'll default to this, what is the government's role? Is the government's role to point out what is information, what is disinformation, what is malinformation? Have you heard that distinction? Dis and malinformation?
Yep.
Okay.
Malinformation.
Yeah.
I think this is probably malinformation right now that you and I are doing.
Yeah. Information that is true but might be harmful to government or other institutions.
Yes.
What is this? That's crazy. That deserves a Tucker laugh. Go ahead, Jay.
Oh, I
You can't do it.
I can't do it.
Oh, that's funny. Okay. So, what do we think about, what does the Bearded Bereans think about freedom of speech? Let's distill it down to one statement.
So, have you seen those bumper stickers, or it's probably on bumper sticker related to gun control that says something like "Keep your hands off of my guns," that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I would say, keep your hands off my information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me determine what's true, what's not, according to the standard. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard what I just said because we went offline for a second.
Yeah, I heard you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's none of the government's business. They have no right to even involve themselves.
Yeah.
And look at their objective in doing it. Of course, it's not to help you and me and the citizens that they are ordained to protect.
Yeah.
It's to protect themselves and advance their own agenda.
Right.
At our expense.
Right.
So it's just another example of the many tyrannies that we face in our land today.
Yeah, I've heard it said that, we fought over a stamp tax. The Revolutionary War was, talk about pennies on the dollar compared to the taxes that have been levied today. And, the constant, even conservatives say, well, you like your roads, don't you? Well, I'd like to know what percentage of my taxes go to the roads because they're certainly not being repaired. Anyway.
So about 76% of your federal taxes go to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, the defense budget, and interest on the debt.
Mm.
Those four things.
One of them being legitimate.
Which one? Defense?
Well, yeah, but I would say that obviously we spend way too much on defense, but
Right.
it is a
Yeah.
legitimate expenditure of the government.
But as a category, an expense category. Yeah.
I lost you.
No, you're right. As an expense category,
Yeah.
it's a legitimate category. Um, but there's way too many dollars being funneled into that category. So there's censorship for you. Keep your hands off my information.
Keep your hands off my information and my guns. Keep your hands off me.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I think that's helpful. I think that it's definitely something that needed to be discussed. Obviously, there's so much more. There's so many more principles in the scriptures that can be brought to bear on these issues. But I think those are the main questions. Is it true? You know, what about gossip? What about slander? And really, it is, the scriptures talk about moving people on to maturity, and a mark of maturity is wisdom.
Yeah.
For them to wade through information to determine what is actually true, what is not. And so whenever you have a government that keeps its people from exercising wisdom, what do you end up with? But a citizenry full of fools, a citizenry that is foolish. So we as Christians need to be exercising that wisdom. We need to be bringing all these things into subjection to the scriptures, understanding what the scriptures have to say about it, and expecting nothing less, obedience to the scriptures from our civic rulers. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Any
So
last word, Jay? Yeah.
Can I just relate this to July 4th for a second?
Let's do it.
As we sit here and I hear these fireworks going off and I see American flags all over the place, and maybe it's just me. It could be, but it seems to me like such a contradiction when we celebrate whatever it is that we're celebrating on July 4th, and we sort of drum up this, proud to be an American, sort of attitude, and yet we look at what America is doing, and it's rather disgusting.
Yeah.
Like in every sort of way.
Right.
From abortion to immigration to censorship to the endless wars that we wage overseas to, the theft of taxation. And I mean, I go on and on and on. And yet we are celebrating something on the 4th of July. And I don't know what it is that we're celebrating, because I love my country, meaning the people and the land, and many of the founding principles, and the history and the culture. So I love my country, but quite honestly, I'm quite ashamed to be an American.
Yeah.
Because of what our government is doing.
Yes.
And so it seems like a disconnect to me. So if we're celebrating our heritage and whatever, that's great. But I would love for the fervor of that celebration to be matched by a fervor of contentment or discontent with the status quo. And I just really don't see it.
Yeah, and I hate to add anything to that because that was really well put. But there's a couple things. One, we cannot, for some reason, as a modern Americans, think categorically. We group in the government with all the land, the people, the culture, the founding principles. We have to be able to separate those things to think properly. Right. That's very important. But secondly, whenever we talk about patriotism and he's a patriot, we need to think that is a commitment to the founding principles and a commitment to changing the status quo. What we did in 1776 was we threw off the reins of a tyrant of tyranny, and less than 100 years later, we find ourselves in very much the same situation. Obviously, today we're several hundred years down the road. These time, whenever we accept little pieces of tyranny along the way, whether it's the new income tax around the world wars, whether it's, different ideas foisted upon the people without the people actually getting there. That's one thing that our government is so good at, stepping out in front of what the will of the people is. There's no democracy. This isn't a representative government even. They're steering the ship, right? Like this is tyranny 100 times what was present in 1776.
Yeah.
And for us to say we're free is a joke. We're not free. We're slaves of the government. You don't own the house that you have right now. You're paying rent to several governments. You're right. Your right to work. We are so comfortable in our slavery. We're not willing to get off the plantation. And what should be renewed whenever we think about these things, this is not a radical idea. This is something our founding fathers would have agreed with. This isn't radical, okay? We should be thinking about how we ought to bring the government that is supposedly voted in by us into subjection to, obviously, the scriptures, but let's just say even the will of the people. We have to be able to talk about these things with our neighbors. We have to, let's, I don't know. There is a disconnect. I don't know what the way forward is other than repentance and faith in Christ. And hopefully the Lord will see fit to cause a reformation of repentance amongst our people. So,
you said we need to be able to talk about these things. And that, I think, was one of the driving forces behind that aspect of the First Amendment, that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. And the design was that the people should be able to talk about these things. And when their government goes off the rails, they should be able to say, hey, the government has gone off the rails. And they should be able to have a conversation with their neighbor about it, or maybe even meet in public and discuss it. That was one of the guardrails that the framers and the founders put in there for us. And so I think it is
freedom of assembly, big deal.
Yeah, it is. So here we are. We're talking about it.
Join
the conversation.
I do have some encouraging information. One of the deacons at my church is fully caught up and has watched every episode of Bearded Bereans, and has been pleasantly surprised, as he put it, at our
low
show.
Expectations is the key to happiness in life. So
yeah, that is true.
It's also the key to my success when people have low expectations of me.
Amen.
Tell him to keep his expectations low.
I have. But very thankful for all of you that are listening, and we hope to continue to provide, something for you to listen to on the way to work or when you're mowing or whatever. But until next time, we will see you later.
Can I just say real quick, as I finish up this 20 acres thing?
Yeah, tell me about it.
Fantastic. It rivals the Padrone, Connecticut.
Really?
Yeah.
Awesome, man. That's high praise.
It is high praise. It's nice and creamy, smooth, great flavor. Construction is excellent, great draw. Man, only positive things to say. So shout out to Corona Cigar Company.
Awesome. I'll have to pick some up. So, very good. Well, until next time, listeners, we will see you later. God bless.
The kings who fight against my Lord shall taste his wrath and meet his sword upon